Featherweight. A My Hero Academia original character piece. 6. He was 6 when the rabbit floated. Not far, and not for long. Just an inch off his palm. Hanging there the way dust hangs in a sunbeam. Before it dropped back down like it had never left. His mother made the sound mothers make when they don't yet know whether to be afraid. And then she got out her phone. And found the registration site. And filled in a box on the family form that had been blank until then. Quirk. Unnamed. Effect. Minor reduction of object mass through sustained contact. The clinic gave it a proper name a few months later, after tests with a scale, and a shoebox of beanbags. Featherweight. Sauda liked the name. It sounded like something a hero would have. His mother put a gold star next to it in his baby book. Beside the date of his first tooth, the pediatric quirk counselor, filling out the assessment that would follow him for the rest of his academic life, wrote a different phrase in the notes field. Grade, minimal utility. Nobody read that part out loud to him. It just sat there waiting. 9. Every public school in the country ran the same aptitude circuit in the spring, and Sauda's was no different. Cones in the gymnasium, a stopwatch, a clipboard. 3 staff members who'd clearly done this every year since the Quirk Registration Act made it standard practice. You lifted the sandbag. You threw the ball. You stood in front of the class and demonstrated your quirk for exactly 8 seconds while a teacher checked a box. Sauda lightened a 10-kilogram sandbag down to about 8.5. It took him 11 seconds of full concentration. And by the end his hands were shaking. The girl before him had turned her arm into cast iron and punched a hole through a plywood board. The boy after him breathed fire. Not much. A candle-sized gout of it. But the whole gym had gone raw anyway. Because fire is fire and lightening a sandbag by 15% is homework. He was placed in the supplemental development gym group, which met on Tuesdays, which was not a punishment. The teacher assured the parents in the printed handout, just a different pace, tailored to different aptitudes. Nobody said the word bottom. Nobody had to. A pro hero came for career day that spring. Blissed, forgettable now. The kind who did school visits between real jobs, and gave a nice speech about how everyone's quirk mattered, no matter how it looked on paper. Sauda believed her completely. He raised his hand during the Q&A with an actual question. Something he'd been turning over for a week. Whether a slow quirk could still be useful in a rescue, if you just had enough time to use it right. The hero said, "Great question," in the bright, automatic way adults say things they haven't really heard. And then the teacher, at the side of the gym, tapped her wrist, because the assembly had 5 minutes left and there were 2 more hands up ahead of his in the queue she was tracking. The hero got through one of them. She never circled back to his. He kept his hand half raised for a few seconds afterward, in case she remembered. And then he put it down. And nobody seemed to notice that he had. 13. By middle school the sorting had hardened into something with a name. Hero Prep Track, and General Track. 2 doors out of the same homeroom. His friend Rio, whose quirk let her run building walls sideways for about 4 seconds, got into Hero Prep on aptitude alone. Sauda's family looked into the after-school cram course that fed into it. 11,000 yen a month, mock battle simulations, a retired pro on staff twice a week, and his mother did the math twice at the kitchen table, before deciding they could manage 1 semester. 1 semester wasn't enough to catch up to kids who'd been doing it since 4th grade. He dropped it in the fall quietly. The way you drop things you've already decided you're bad at. Rio didn't stop being his friend. She just started having a whole life he wasn't in. Team names, sparring partners, an actual coach who knew her name. 14. Rio invited him to watch her Hero Prep classes open sparring day, because she still thought of him as her friend first and a general track kid second, and because she genuinely wanted him there. He went. He sat in the bleachers with a handful of other siblings and parents while 11 kids in padded gear ran drills that looked, even at 14, disturbingly close to the real thing. Grapples, quirk combos, a coach calling out corrections with the easy authority of someone who assumed every kid on that floor had a future worth correcting. Rio's building wall run got a round of applause. Afterward she jogged over sweaty and grinning, said you should join. Seriously, they let general track kids audit for free, and meant it as a kindness, which was the worst part. He said maybe. He knew. Watching the coach clap a hand on the shoulder of a boy whose quirk let him spit acid, that auditing for free and being coached were not the same offer, and that no one there was going to correct his form, because no one there had been asked to. He clapped along with everyone else when the session ended. He told Rio it was awesome. It was awesome. That was almost the whole problem. It was easy to be happy for her and quietly certain, at the same time, that whatever this was, it had already decided it wasn't for him. 15. He sat the Hero Prep placement exam anyway. Because the school allowed it and his mother said it costs nothing to try, which wasn't true. Exactly, it cost the 2 weeks he spent afterward rereading his practical score sheet like it might change. The written portion he aced. The mock battle portion, 3 minutes against a padded training bot calibrated to give students a fair read on their combat application, ended with him having lowered the bot's effective weight by around 10% and otherwise done nothing it would notice. The proctor's comment, printed in small type, at the bottom: Quirk shows no clear combat or rescue application at current strength. Recommend general track. That same month, a rumor went around school, later confirmed, later a minor legend, that some kid 2 districts over, completely quirkless, no ability at all, had gotten into the country's most famous hero course on a recommendation nobody could quite explain. Sauda heard it 3 separate times from 3 separate people, each one delivering it like an inspiring story. He did not find it inspiring. He found it unbearable, in a way he didn't have words for yet. Proof that the door wasn't actually locked, that it opened for some people for reasons that had nothing to do with fairness, which was almost worse than if it had just been locked for everyone. 16. The guidance counselor was not unkind. He wants that on the record later, when he thinks back on it. She was tired. She had 11 other students that hour, and she was not unkind. Most agencies run an automatic screen now, she said, sliding a pamphlet across the desk without quite looking up from her monitor. Combat rating, rescue tonnage rating, that kind of thing. Featherweight's going to score low on both no matter how good your control is. That's not a reflection on you. It's just how the software's built. She circled 2 programs on the pamphlet: logistics certification, industrial trades, and told him they were very solid paths, and she believed it when she said it, and she had said some version of the same sentence to at least 4 students already that week. 18. He graduated general track, and took the first job that would have him, overnight stocking at a distribution center, then delivery, then back to the distribution center when delivery didn't pay enough to cover the apartment. He was fine. He told his mother he was fine, and mostly meant it. Rio texted sometimes, less each year, busy with an agency internship that had turned into a junior contract. He was happy for her in the specific, tiring way you're happy for someone whose life photographs better than yours. 19. The typhoon that hit that September was the worst in 11 years, and for 3 days the news ran nothing else. A levee gone in the Old River District, whole blocks of ground floors underwater, evacuation centers running out of cots. Sauda went down to the community hall near his apartment, because the flyer on the door said, "All volunteers welcome, no license required for non-quirk assistance," and he figured he could carry boxes as well as anyone. The hero running point at that site went by Anchor, a solid, broad-shouldered woman whose quirk let her increase her own mass and density on command, useful for holding collapsing structures and anchoring rescue lines. Exactly the kind of quirk that scores well on every automatic screen there is. She was not glamorous, and she was not famous, and she had been on her feet for something like 30 hours straight, running a relief effort that was short 11 agency staff, because 3 other disaster sites in the prefecture needed them worse. For most of the first day he did what every other untrained volunteer did: carried sandbags, ferried bottled water, held a tarp down against wind that kept trying to take it. He was good at being useful in the boring way, and nobody asked him to be anything else. On the second day, they hit a stuck cargo container, blocking the only dry route into a flooded row of houses where 2 elderly residents were still trapped on a second floor, water rising slow but steady through their ground level, too heavy to move by hand, too narrow a gap to get the loader truck into, and every minute spent finding another way was a minute the water kept climbing the stairs behind them. Someone suggested going around through a side lot, and someone else said the side lot had already flooded past the truck's clearance. Sauda, standing at the edge of the volunteer line with nothing in his hands for the first time in an hour, said, "I might be able to help with that," in a voice that surprised him with how steady it came out. He put both hands flat on the container's cold, rain-slick metal and pushed everything he had into it, not the 11 careful seconds of a school gymnasium test, but real effort, the kind he'd never had a reason to find the bottom of before. It took almost a full minute. His arms were shaking before he was a third of the way there, and Anchor, crouched beside him bracing the far end with her own weight thrown against it, kept saying, low and even, "You've got it. Just breathe. You've got it," until the container's effective weight had dropped just enough that 4 volunteers could shove the last half-meter and clear the path. Anchor watched the whole thing. She crouched down next to him afterward while he was still catching his breath, hands actually shaking, and said, "That's a controlled quirk. That's not nothing. You ever think about getting registered for provisional work? He said he'd tried, and failed the exams. She said, failing the exam, and not being useful aren't the same thing. Come by my agency office when this is over. I'll write you a letter. Get you a real evaluation, instead of the software one. I mean it. She did mean it. That's the part that matters. She wrote his name and number on the back of a supply manifest because it was the only paper in her pocket, and she meant, in that exact moment, to follow through. 20. He called the agency 2 weeks later. Once the news vans had left and the story had moved on to the next disaster, the receptionist was polite and had no record of any Sauda Nakagawa in the intake system. He called again a month after that. Anchor herself came on the line eventually, apologetic in the specific worn-down way of someone who has apologized for a dozen similar things that same week. The manifest had gone into a box of paperwork from the relief site. The whole agency had been absorbing two neighboring districts' overflow caseload since the typhoon, and somewhere in the scramble his name had simply never made it off a piece of scrap paper and into an actual file. I really am sorry, she said, and she was. It's just been, I'll be honest, it's been a lot here. Send me your information again, and I'll make sure this time. He did. He never heard back. He didn't call a third time. It wasn't that he stopped believing her. It was that he understood, finally and completely, that being sorry and being remembered were two entirely different resources, and that people like him were never going to be worth spending the second one on no matter how honestly the first one was meant. 21. He applied to 19 agencies that spring. The kind that hired unlicensed support staff for grunt work, equipment carriers, site cleanup, the unglamorous edges of hero work that still paid better than warehouse shifts. 14 of the 19 rejected him before a human being had ever read his application, the automatic screen flagging his combat and rescue tonnage ratings as below threshold, and routing the file straight to an auto reply. Thank you for your interest in joining our team. At this time we are unable to move forward with your application. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. He got the exact sentence, word for word, from 3 different agencies in the same week, and understood from that alone that no one at any of them had actually typed it. Of the 5 that let a person look at his file, 4 sent a form rejection with a name attached instead of no name at all, which he supposed was meant to feel more human. The 5th called him in for an interview, seemed genuinely interested in the container story from the typhoon relief effort, and then explained, apologetically, that their insurance carrier required a minimum rescue tonnage certification the agency itself had no authority to waive. She wished him luck. She meant it, probably in the same worn-out way Anchor had. 22. The warehouse job that followed paid decently for a while, because the floor manager figured out inside of a month what Sauda's quirk was good for, and began quietly routing him onto the loading dock whenever a shipment ran heavy. Lightened pallets moved faster. Faster pallets meant better numbers on the manager's weekly report. Nobody called it quirk labor, because quirk labor required a commercial permit and hazard insurance, and a wage bump that would have shown up on a ledger somewhere, and none of that existed for Sauda. It was just Nakagawa's good with the heavy stuff, said with a clap on the shoulder, and a regular wage, and no acknowledgement on paper that anything unusual was happening at all. 23. The accident wasn't his fault, and it also wasn't not his fault, in the way workplace accidents at understaffed sites usually aren't any one clean thing. A rig strap failed on a pallet he'd been lightening, the strap rated for the pallet's true weight, not its quirk-reduced weight, a detail nobody had ever formally accounted for because nobody had ever formally acknowledged the practice existed, and a coworker took a crate to the shoulder that put him in the hospital for 4 days. The insurance investigation found, cleanly and quickly, a case of unauthorized commercial quirk use contributing to a workplace injury, Class C violation, and the floor manager, asked directly, said he'd never instructed anyone to use their quirk on the job, which was technically true in the sense that he'd never once put it in writing. Sauda got the citation. Sauda got fined. Sauda got let go for site safety reasons, no further comment, and the record, unauthorized quirk use, contributing factor in injury, sat in the prefectural registry from then on, one search away from anyone who ever ran a background check on him again. 24. He didn't tell his mother the whole story, just that the job hadn't worked out, and she didn't ask the follow-up question that would have made him tell her, because she was working 2 jobs herself, and had learned not to go looking for extra weight to carry. It wasn't cruelty, it was 2 tired people conserving what they had left for each other in the smallest possible portions. Rio still texted at New Year's. He still answered. The gap between their lives had gotten wide enough that neither of them tried to bridge it with more than that anymore. Somewhere in there he found the forums. Not the extremist ones. Not at first. Just message boards for people the aptitude system had sorted into the bottom half. Quirkless posters. Weak quirk posters, a whole quiet population comparing notes on which agencies' automatic screens could sometimes be beaten, and which never could, which prefectures were more lenient about citations, which lawyers would look at an unauthorized use case for a payment plan. It felt, for the first time in a long while, like being somewhere he wasn't the only one. People posted their rejection emails like trophies of a shared, ridiculous war. Got the future endeavors won again. 5 for 5 this month. And other people replied with the small, tired solidarity of people who'd gotten the exact same email. Some of the later threads got angrier than the early ones. Threads with names like "When does helping stop being worth it?" and "The math doesn't work, and they know it doesn't work." Full of stories that all had the same shape as his own, filed down into different details. He read those too. Occasionally someone would post a link to somewhere further out, somewhere with a name Sauda had seen in the news attached to worse things than message board venting, and the thread would go quiet. And then a few days later 3 or 4 of the regular posters would simply stop showing up. Nobody ever announced why. He told himself he was just reading. He told himself that for a long time. And it was true right up until it wasn't. 25. The video that found him wasn't even about him, not really. A man having some kind of breakdown outside a convenience store, swinging a length of pipe at anyone who got close, and Sauda, walking home. Nothing more heroic in mind than getting past the scene without getting hit. Had put a hand on the pipe as the man raised it and lightened it just enough, just for the half second that mattered, that the swing went wide, and caught nothing but air. Someone across the street had their phone up already, filming for no reason, other than that a man with a pipe seemed like the kind of thing worth filming. By the time the responding officers arrived, the man with the pipe had been talked down by the convenience store clerk, and Sauda was the one on the ground with a knee in his back, being asked for quirk registration papers he'd never been issued. Because a stranger using an unlicensed ability in the middle of a public incident looks, from 30 feet and a phone camera and a dispatch call, that only had time for the word quirk and the word weapon in the same sentence, exactly like a threat and exactly like a rescue. And there had been no time on scene to work out which before backup arrived already sure of the answer. He wasn't charged with anything in the end. There wasn't anything to charge him with. But the clip existed before the clearing existed, the way it always does, and the clip was the only part that traveled. It went around for 2 days with a caption that had nothing to do with what actually happened. Man restrained after wielding quirk in public, motive unclear, and a comment section that filled in the word unclear however it wanted to. He didn't read past the first 50. He didn't need to. He'd read enough like them already, on the forums. About people who looked like him. People who'd learned the hard way that helping and threatening could be filmed from the exact same angle. The message came on the 3rd night. Through the account he barely used anymore, from a name he didn't recognize. Saw the footage. You didn't run. Most people run. There's a place for people who are tired of being the thing everyone assumes is the problem, instead of the thing that actually helps. No pressure. Just figured someone should finally say it to you straight. It doesn't have to be like this. Not for you. If that's something you want to talk about, I'm here. He read it standing at his kitchen counter with the lights off, the way he'd read most things lately. And then he read it again sitting down, and then a 3rd time an hour after that. Phone screen the only light in the small room. Rain had started against the window somewhere in between, the ordinary kind. Nothing like the typhoon. Just weather doing what weather does without asking anyone's permission. He thought about the shoebox of beanbags, and the gold star in the baby book. He thought about 11 seconds in a school gymnasium, and a hand half raised in a bleacher line that no one ever called on again. He thought about a supply manifest with his name and number on the back of it, folded into a box, in an office, in a building he would never enter, meant sincerely and forgotten completely, which he now understood were not opposites, but the same thing wearing 2 different faces. He thought about the word sorry. How many times it had been handed to him with its whole weight intact, and how consistently that weight had turned out to cost the person giving it absolutely nothing at all. He thought about 14 form letters that had never been written by a human hand, and a citation with his name spelled correctly at least, and a knee in his back on a wet street outside a convenience store, for the crime of being faster than the police to notice someone needed help. None of it, on its own, had ever been enough to justify anything. He was honest with himself about that much, even now. It wasn't a single wound. It was closer to 100 small ones, each survivable, each explainable, each somebody's reasonable answer to a reasonable question, stacked so evenly on top of each other that the weight of the whole thing had become invisible even to him, until a stranger on a screen had simply said, out loud, "It doesn't have to be like this." And something in him that had been holding very still for a very long time stopped holding still. His thumb hovered over the reply field for a long time, the cursor blinking in the empty box, patient as rain. Then it came down, and he began to type.